Alright, it is time for the Singapore Grand Prix observations. My working title for this one is The Perfect Storm, Gambling and Impatience. That may or may not change by the time this video launches, who knows. So I'm going to start this one off with a niche talking point, esoterica if you will. The value of the Colosseum and the World War III update. Right, so what's the value of the Colosseum? Now is when I hope people are seeing the value of the Colosseum, because World War III is brewing. I'm not sure if it's already started. As far as I'm concerned, it's already started. I'll be very surprised if World War III doesn't happen from here on. But World War III has essentially already started. And it's easy enough to, well, put it away, forget about it, as long as the Colosseum is running. The football ran, the Formula 1 ran, and everything went on as normal. Alright, everything went on as normal. Big things happened. Nord Stream pipelines got removed from the board. Who did it doesn't really matter, right? The fact is it's been done. So so we're going to feel the ramifications of that in the years to come. Someone might say, oh, but Russia is already being sanctioned, and Europe had turned off the pipe. Ukraine had turned off the pipe anyway, because it passes through Ukraine. Well, now, even if some sort of settlement is agreed, the pipes aren't being turned back on. You get a little more technical with it. I'm not sure if Russia are jobbing right now, or if they're actually vying to be the tip of the globalist spear, or if they're rejecting the globalist project entirely right now. Who knows? I'm not entirely sure on that. Putin's making his very big speech and what have you. But America, by contrast, America is battling to be the tip of the globalist spear. There is no other interpretation to make of their maneuvers, the way they're moving right now. And so that means that it's America who's probably blown up the pipelines. Doesn't matter who's done it now, but it's America who's blown them up in order to completely head off a potential Germany and Russia alliance, because, well, material resources they talk very loudly. They'll talk very loudly, and we'll see just how loudly they talk. I wonder just how bulletproof the propaganda is in some years to come. Right. Likewise, the Queen died. The Queen dying is just a handing over of eras. Right. The previous era is now done. We are now moving forward into whatever the new era is. All right. Charles, Prince. I suppose he's King Charles now. King Charles. This next era doesn't end with him, but the Queen is just a very useful bookmark for the beginning and end of a new era. So when King Charles dies, he is not going to mark the end of the next era. Although something we do, just I don't know if this is some metaphysical rule or what have you, but something we do is every time there's an end of an era, well, we got to kick it off with a world war. So that might be happening. I mean, all the metaphysical conditions are ripe for disaster. I shouldn't be laughing, but, well, I gotta laugh otherwise. This is where we are as far as I see it. World War III has started. The apparatus is continuing to move as though nothing has happened. Alright, I would be very surprised if we actually have a 2023 season. But who knows? Who knows? This might just stir and brew until 2025, this whole Russia-Ukraine situation with... Although if Ukraine are actually joining NATO, then that is the commencement of World War III anyway. Putin's annexed his areas. I'm not sure if Ukraine are accepting that or not. I don't particularly care. All I do know is that the Nord Stream pipes are gone, and and those mattered. Those mattered quite a bit. We'll know just how much the Nord Stream is worth, pending whether it scuppers the VW entry, or perhaps even forces Mercedes out of F1. We'll see what happens on that front. We'll definitely see what happens. I suppose, because America is of course taking points on this project, right? On whatever the globalist project is going to be from here on, they are obviously taking the point. So it remains to be seen if perhaps America can forward material resources that are essential before the winter to Germany. It remains to be seen if that can be done. Probably can be done, but at great expense, at least relative to the Nord Stream as it existed. But anyway, anyway, a little less of that, because the Grand Prix went on. And for as long as the Grand Prix keeps going on, there's probably not that much to worry about. I suppose life on the ground in a few European countries might get a little tight, regardless. Alright, into the weekend proper. So the big talking point coming away from this weekend is that someone, perhaps someone's, one or two teams, is perhaps in breach of financial regulations. Now, until there's any vetted financials that have come out, there's really no point commenting on this one way or the other, because it's just going to be a case of he said, she said. Because Toto Wolff, he's saying it's an open secret in the Formula One back rooms that Red Bull were in breach or are in breach of financial regulations, right? He's saying it's an open secret. So what that intimates is that, okay, these teams, accountants and engineers are meeting in the back rooms and comparing their data on Red Bull and saying, can they really, well, one, do we have our estimates correct here? Do they match up with yours? Are they in the same range? And two, if they are in the same range, how are they making all the development that they are making? And there may or may not be answers for that. I'm not particularly privy as to what they may be. But the Red Bull Powertrains facility was being set up last season. That was a known expense that all the teams signed off on. If I'm getting my info right, I do believe that is correct. That is a known expense for Red Bull that all the teams signed off on, because it's like $100 million, $200 million build. Like, the money for this has to come from somewhere. The budget, and it's always going to be out of budgets for whatever the legal budget caps are. So it's a facility expense. It's a different thing. Now, could some money from that operation have spilled over into the actual racing project? Who knows, right? It depends how much. I think one other thing people need to have in mind with these breaches of financial regulations is like a tolerable range of of breach. Because F1 themselves have marked out this 5% under and over 5%. Okay, if someone's over budget by 1.1%, what are you actually going to penalize them with? You'd have to just fine them. That's a fine. It's probably a fine all the way up until like 3.1%. Then you may or may not. Some people might say it's only a fine up until 5% even. But then you may or may not start taking away races from their history, or docking points. That's functionally what that would be. You'd start docking points, and that's really only starting at about 6 or 7%, the docking of points, really. Some might say 5% over budget, you got to start docking points. That could just be off the back of inflation and and a slight misbudget in a competitive season when bringing, I don't know, some minor upgrades. Or we brought in an extra front ring. You know, we tried out a new front wing concept for this or that Grand Prix to try get an edge. And you do that a few times over the season and it could rack up, but that's a minor expense. Right, but at 7.5% and up, you are probably looking at points deductions and or championship exclusions, right? And it kind of ranks up quickly. You can go from a fine to suddenly you're excluded from the championship in very small margins. Because at some point it has to be a conscious overspend. I'm pretty sure 4% and up is conscious overspend. But all that aside, everyone's saying their books are in order. Red Bull are saying their books are in order. Aston Martin are saying their books are in order. No one else is talking about their books because their names haven't been mentioned, but are everyone's books in order? Probably not. On some level, probably not. But it's not really worth throwing names out this way or that way, or dreaming up punishments until the papers are actually out. Right? The papers got to come out first. those financials got to come out first. Until those are out, there's nothing to really say this way or that way, and one is going to assume that a team of engineers, accountants, and perhaps even actuaries from FIA side are going to be going over everyone's finances, right, and run the most thorough audits every season. Like, is that really going to happen? We'll have to wait and see if that actually happens. There's a lot of teams making some noise about F1's handling of this situation, dictating just how much weight should be put on F1's idea for budget cap, or on Ross Brawn's idea for budget cap. So you can expect Brawn to handle this situation seriously, but I cannot expect Formula 1 to handle this situation seriously. Brawn might have his own tolerances in mind, such as 2% we start docking points and 5% and up is championship. He might have those ideas, but he's not gonna make the sole decision on this. It's not gonna be a decision that rests on one person. There's gonna be dilution in that. All right. Likewise, however many people are being assembled to go over these teams' finances, I mean, the more people this is just the way it is, right? The more people that get added to the team, right, the team of auditors, the more people that get added, the more likelihood there is for corruption. If the team is capped at 3, a team of 3 elites, an elite 3 of auditing, right, if the team is capped to that, then I will have some faith in this whole budget caps era being regulated correctly. I might even have some faith up to 4 or 5 people on this team, but as soon as we get to 6 and up, I mean, it's a bust at that point. I wouldn't even put any weight onto this. I probably wouldn't even talk about it in the future. But anyway, we first got to see what happens, right? Red Bull, of course, are going to produce clean books. Racing Martin are going to produce clean books. I would expect nothing else. I would expect nothing else. Alright, bit of a disaster weekend for Mercedes. Things unfolded for George Russell a lot earlier in the weekend, but I digress. The first thing to take away from this weekend is Sir Lewis Hamilton has put the nose ring back in. Now, I'm not sure if there was a procedural error on his part, or if he's just giving the FIA the middle finger, because this was noted only after the a possible financial regulations breach, and that's when it was noted that, oh, he's got a nose ring in. So I'm assuming he put the nose ring on overnight when the news came out. So now Sir Lewis Hamilton is playing a bit of 4D chess with F1, right? Because of course they're gonna they're gonna stop the show for the piercings, right? For the nose ring, they're gonna stop the show for it, but they're not gonna stop the show for the budget cap breach. But oh well. So Lewis, he doing his work. I'm gonna just let him get on with it. All right. Same way I let him get on with this talking point earlier. Now, Sir Lewis Hamilton, he had a take early on in the season. It doesn't really matter when. This was very early on in the season, though. Maybe like a third into the season, somewhere there. But anyway, he had this take that he was the best teammate he had ever been in all his years in Formula One. And well, I reckon it was better to just let him move in silence on that one, because that wasn't going to be talked about all too loudly. But here in Singapore, we really see where that comes to the fore, because George, his whole weekend has come undone on Saturday when it started raining, and their weather experts probably gave them info that it was going to be raining for the Grand Prix as well. So that was when George's weekend came undone, because he now had to chase a setup. There was no standard setup at that point. Well, I suppose the standard setup is just throw in as much downforce as possible and just wing it, right? That's how it works at Singapore. But I suppose there's intricacies and suspension setup and all of that. He couldn't unlock any of that himself in the short time permitted before qualifying and then heading into the Grand Prix before Park for May. He couldn't do that, George. Alright. So Lewis, what Sir Lewis does, this is why he said he's the best teammate he's ever been. What Sir Lewis has been doing this season is he has not been running conventional weekends. He's still running exploratory setups, he's still running those. Alright. It's just not as they're not being carried into the Grand Prix, and they're not as extreme as earlier in the season. So what do I mean by exploratory setups? Well, FP1 happens and the team finds their conventional setup for the weekend, right? FP2 happens, George, he keeps on developing the most conventional setup. So Lewis, he tries something exotic with the setup to try find an edge, right? He does that, and if that doesn't work, then FP3, they'll dial the car back in for qualifying in the Grand Prix, using George Russell's setup as a reference. So Sir Lewis, on some level, he's not been getting to set up his car like it's conventional racing for essentially most of the season. Right, it's not talked about too loudly. I don't even talk about it too loudly here. But that's what's been happening. Now that's come undone here at Singapore because of the change in weather, and well, because at the end of the day in Singapore, you got to be able to find the setup yourself and find your rhythm on the circuit yourself, find your tempo yourself. Because at Singapore, it's especially when it rains, right? We weren't granted a wet race for a long time at Singapore, right? There was always like a hint that, oh, it might rain this weekend. Oh, it might rain. We've gotten a lot of wet races recently in Singapore. A lot of them. So that's interesting. And one thing that Singapore definitely does become in the wet is a separator, especially within teams. Right? I'm not saying that this is occurred at Red Bull or what have you, this Grand Prix, but it does become a separator, and you get to see what separates these two drivers in the same team. You get to see it quite directly at Singapore, and well, Singapore in the rain, right? In the dry, it's a different thing. It's an endurance test in the dry, basically. But in the rain, well, well, there's too many skill checks being done on the drivers to list them all in the rain. But yeah, George, he couldn't hack it. You couldn't hack it. It's a different thing when you now have to get your car good enough to well, to qualify in the top 6. It's a different thing. Start draining all of a sudden. But anyway, all that out of the way, right? I don't expect Sir Lewis to be running conventional weekends because he's still doing this even now at the season, and I don't even think there's value to doing it at this point of the season. Yeah, that's just how Sir Lewis is working this season. I don't expect him to change that and chase a result if there's one on offer, because there was one on offer here in Singapore and he's still done that, right? And now there's the mockingbirds are chirping, saying that Mercedes have found a new secret performance upgrade for Suzuka. It's gonna guarantee a win, is it? Okay. Okay, Suzuka, I have for anyone who's been keeping up with these videos, I suppose, Suzuka I have marked out as a circuit where Mercedes can, well, let me not say where Mercedes can win, that's not what I said, but I've marked it out as a circuit where I can't actually theory craft how the cars are going to match up with each other there, because it's such a unique circuit. And of course the Red Bull is going to be good, but it's more about how good the other cars are relative to it. I expect the Ferrari to be very good at Suzuka, and I expect the Mercedes to be good at Suzuka. Will the Mercedes be good enough? I don't know. Will the Ferrari be good enough? I actually expect the Ferrari to be better. So, George had a terrible qualifying because he couldn't find his own setup, and he started from the pits, and yeah, that was his race done. His race was over from there. He wasn't fast enough to, and this is how I know he's completely missed his setup, right? He wasn't fast enough to overtake any of the cars that were at the back of the grid, so his weekend was done as soon as he fluffed his setup heading into qualifying. His weekend was done. They tried to chase the fastest lap at the end by pitting him for soft tires. Yeah, they tried to chase that, and Verstappen, he locked out the fastest lap anyway. He tried to gamble and go into the slicks as early as possible. It didn't work. The window was good, right? The timing of it was good, but the circuit wasn't quite ready. Probably should have gone on to softs if he had any. There was just a little too much sheen on the circuit still. Just a little too much. I suppose it doesn't help that Monaco doesn't even have this feature regularly, because they resurface, well, the racetrack so often. What the areas that can be considered the racetrack at Monaco, they resurface it so often that it doesn't really have these features anymore. Singapore still has traditional road paintings all over the circuit. In the rain, can you imagine? No one wants to touch the white line on an actual racing circuit in the rain. On a street circuit with actual painted lines all over the place, Baku has this as well, but it's never gonna rain there. But in a street circuit with actual painted lines on the place, you never want it to rain there. You're gonna be slipping and sliding all over the paint. The paint's everywhere. Can't escape it. But anyway, everyone definitely earned their money this Grand Prix, I must say. Everyone definitely earned their keep, earned their salary. Everyone who finished definitely earned their keep and earned their salary. But yeah, George started from the pits. His race was over. He couldn't make heads or tails of this Grand Prix. Mercedes opted out of starting Sir Lewis Hamilton on the full wet tire. I believe that was the correct decision, because I just don't see how the full wet was going to cope with such a change in conditions, right? From when the Grand Prix started to when they went on the slicks, That's 33 laps off a very slowly drying circuit, and for a lot of the time the circuit was, well, it looked dry enough for slicks. Wasn't actually dry enough for slicks, but it looked dry enough for slicks, and I can't see a wet tire managing that for 33 laps. I just can't see it. Even if you wear it down to slicks, I actually think you just have less grip at that point than if you had a worn out insert. But anyway, anyway, I think Mercedes were right to not let him start on the wet tire. It would have probably looked good for 10 laps, and after that he would have had to make an extra pit stop that no one else would have to make, and I don't think the tire would be fast enough to work up a 20 odd second gap, right? I suppose this would have been covered in a debrief for Mercedes, but it's not an issue whether he started on wets or inters. That's starting on wets would have been the worst, for sure. For sure. Now to address the start, there's this turn 1, lap 1. Look, turn 1, lap 1, like lap 1 incidents in general are more for sporting a situation between drivers, as opposed to something that the stewards can intervene on, unless it's like something egregious, I suppose, right? That would be the exception, but it wasn't anything egregious. That's just a regular situation that occurs on the starts of Grand Prix. That's just a regular situation, right? And it wasn't particularly unsporting from Sainz. Like, yeah, the car's going to go there. The circuit's even turning up into into where the cars are hoping to be. You know, that one's not an issue, as opposed to what happened in Imola 2021. I suppose where else? Monza, same season, lap 1. What was that? Turn 4. Which chicane is that? Is it La Rogia? I forget. But anyway, anyway, also happened there. Maximilian, lap 1. Unsporting, taking off of a driver. It's just an unsporting situation. I've got a lot of those examples for Maximilian Verstappen versus Sir Lewis Hamilton. I don't actually want to dig into the grab bag right now. Right, there's worse things that happened over the 2021 season anyway. And specifically for 2021, Verstappen was unsporting in those lap 1 incidents with Sulu. He was unsporting. People are not gonna like that if they're Verstappen. Like, it is what it is. This is why people fell out of love with the guy over the course of the season, because they see it happening. They don't exactly have the words for it, but they see it and they understand it. Right, Sainz, this situation, Hamilton versus Sainz, into lap 1 of the Singapore, like, it's just a racing incident. Like, it is, that shit happens. Right, that shit happens. Sir Lewis came out in the same position he was probably going to come out anyway if they somehow managed to both stay on, well, within the white lines, and like, no one's really at fault for it. Sainz, he might be embarrassed about it, but like, that's just racing at the end of the day. And Sir Lewis, well, he was stuck behind Sainz from then on. He was really stuck. Sir Lewis Hamilton, he started flaming Sainz for being slow on lap 27. That's when you know he was right. I suppose he's been stuck behind him since the very start of the Grand Prix, and after a safety car period, and I suppose it would get, well, of course it would get frustrating, but well, no, he's not gonna just jump out the way, right? And just because he's slow in the corners where it actually matters for lap time doesn't mean that the car isn't going to rocket him down the straight faster than fast enough to stay ahead of a DRS empowered Mercedes. It doesn't mean that it's not going to do that. But anyway, yeah, I was expecting something to happen. Whether they were going to collide or Sir Lewis was going to have his own accident or somehow complete an overtake, something was going to happen there. Just on account of, well, Sir Lewis had to flame Carlos Sainz for being slow. Like, that got played on the air. I suppose it probably happens a lot more often than does get aired. But I suppose it's probably notable for even the real-time editors and the directors. Right? It's probably notable for them. Like, oh, This barely happens with Lewis Hamilton. Put it on the air. So yeah, he was frustrated. And I mean, fair game. Listen, it's hard to overtake at Singapore, right? It's hard. You know, I don't know why Vettel is always spoken to the media saying that. I'm not sure if he's talking in relation to the budget caps or how the cars race, right? Especially after the finish that Tracy Martin have gotten here at Singapore. But anyway, it's hard to overtake at Singapore. There's no change of formula that's gonna like change that. I quite frankly don't understand like what Vettel or any other naysayer of the formula would be having to say after a Singaporean Grand Prix about standards of racing. Well, about standards of racing and overtaking opportunities. I don't really know what there would be to say about it one way or the other, right? Because you don't get, you see, this is the thing about like overtaking. You don't get the jeopardy if overtaking is so easy, right? You don't get a Sir Lewis Hamilton getting frustrated behind a Carlos Sainz if the overtake is easy. You don't get that. You don't get Maximilian like getting frustrated behind a Lando Norris or whoever he was behind. You don't get that if overtaking is easy, because the overtake would have been accomplished in easier fashion. Like, you know, you don't get these situations, right? You don't get Maximilian stuck down the grid trying to fight his way through and actually having to fight his way through, right? People are gonna, well, let me get to that when I get to that. But anyway, it's hard to overtake at Singapore. Can't overstate that. It's fucking hard. Not as hard as Monaco, but it's hard. And it's better on account of it being hard. It can't be easy to overtake everywhere. It really can't. I like it that there are still circuits where your overtakes really have to be earned. I quite like that. Oh, but yeah, what was Sir Lewis Hamilton's response to, well, a Sainz that he felt was just too slow to be real? Well, during the VSC, right, George Russell, he's opened up the VSC games, right? Both Sir Lewis Hamilton and Maximilian Verstappen, they were trying to gamble with the VSC ending time. So that was on lap 30, I believe. They were trying to gamble with that, right? Because Maximilian, he was trying to get a jump on Lando Norris, and Sir Lewis Hamilton, he was trying to get a jump on Carlos Sainz, right? So they were gambling with when this VSC is possibly going to end, and they just get to slingshot past their Maximilian might have done it if it, well, they both would have done it if the VSCs ended when when they made their attempts. But yeah, it's quite interesting that that's now a feature. Well, let me not say it's now a feature. I don't think there's going to be a lot of drivers attempting it, or at least not for this season. Alright, maybe next season when the cars are a bit closer, we'll see. Anyway, Sir Lewis Hamilton, he lost his patience with Sainz in lap 33, and his race was pretty much over from there. Well, the race he was hoping to have was pretty much over from there. I'm actually surprised that the front wing didn't come off completely after that. It was just some, well, I say end plate damage. Even the whole left side of the wing was hanging down a bit. But anyway, it was just end plate damage at the end of the day, and a bit of sag as a result of it. But yeah, I'm pretty impressed the wing didn't just come off completely. That would have been a very valuable a very valuable trait to have on the car before the black and orange flag was applied so liberally. That would have been a very handy trait. But yeah, Sir Lewis Hamilton, he filtered out back between Verstappen and Norris, and that was it right there. That was it. Both Verstappen and Sir Lewis Hamilton, they've given each other a complex at this point, right? Neither of them wants to be overtaken by the other, and it's very interesting how that plays out in some scenarios. It will be But we'll have a fascinating season if they're both given championship contending cars again. We'll really have a fascinating season. I don't think they'll both get championship contending cars at the same time again, but that would be a very interesting season. But yeah, so Lewis Hamilton, he lost his patience, damaged his front wing. He got given the black and orange flag, and he had to pit to get it repaired. And it didn't really matter that the safety car came out like a few laps later, right? It didn't really matter because Sainz, Perez, Verstappen, they all pitted before the safety car came out. Only Norris pitted during the safety car. He was the one, and Danny Rick, I suppose, they were the ones who benefited really from that safety car. No one else really benefited, right? I suppose Lewis Hamilton also lost out to Lando Norris, but you know, he has to repair a whole front wing, so that's an extra how many seconds is that? That's an extra 7 seconds on your pit stop, so so it really didn't matter. He was going to be behind them anyway, with or without safety car, and he was going to have to race them after the mistake that he made. George Russell, he picked up a puncture versus baby Schumacher. That was George's fault. He moved into Schumacher. That was a very interesting puncture because it was wheel-to-wheel contact. I'm not sure if those wheel caps have some part to play in that, but that was quite interesting. And it resulted in a puncture. And after George had to pit for, well, his puncture, he caught back up to baby Schumacher, and he noted that baby Schumacher was defending like it was the race of his life. Well, it probably was the race of his life. Alright, Gunther, he wants him out. He's had enough of this baby Schumacher thing. He wants to try something more concrete, right? But anyway, I mean, that was that. So Lewis Hamilton, he couldn't make an impression on the Racing Martins. There was 13 minutes remaining, and as soon as Maximilian was driving up behind him, the afterburners got turned on, and suddenly he was on the back of Vettel. Yeah, that was there was some really good form at the back end there. The result doesn't really matter at that point, but there was some good form. Yeah, a disappointing weekend for Mercedes, but there's some silver linings for Suzuka, I suppose, in that they actually look like they've got a serviceable car in the top 3, right? So there are some positives to take away. Serviceable in certain environments, I should say. Alright, that's a very important caveat I should add, not just that the car is serviceable relative to the Ferrari and the Red Bull, but in certain environments it definitely is. Of course, high downforce. We'll see what happens at Suzuka, but otherwise I really don't think Sir Lewis Hamilton is going to fish out a win this season, unless perhaps some wild Grand Prix happens. Anything could happen, as always. It's Formula 1. But anyway, alright, a spotty weekend from Red Bull. Alright, a bit of a spotty weekend. I suppose it started on Friday, actually. It started on Friday. Verstappen was missing track time. I'm not particularly sure what was wrong with his car. I don't particularly care what was wrong with his car. He was just missing track time while Red Bull was sorting something out. I'm not sure if that was an FP2 or 1. It was somewhere. I think it was FP2. Yeah, it should have been FP2. Charles Leclerc also missed out some track time in FP2. Anyway, so that was the start of a difficult weekend for Maximilian Verstappen, because, well, you can't really afford to be missing track time at Singapore, because you're not gonna make up that time to be honing in your setup. There's instances where the car is just that good that you don't need your setup dialed in quite that well. And like George Russell, I know Maximilian Verstappen has not gotten the setup quite where he wants it to be, on account of he wasn't able to just drive into the top 6 as easily as, well, of course it's Singapore, it's hard to overtake in Singapore, but that Red Bull being piloted by Maximilian Verstappen, it definitely could have, but he didn't quite get a setup right. And likewise on Saturday in qualifying, he had a fuel measuring emergency. Red Bull were not going to have enough fuel in the car to pass scrutineering. Right, it's not really that, oh, they've tried to do some sort of hijinks. They simply didn't fuel the car for the amount of laps that Maximilian needed, right? And Singapore is the highest fuel consumption circuit on the calendar right now. Right, well, now that it's back on the calendar, it wasn't for a few seasons. But yeah, they just didn't put in enough fuel because, well, Maximilian didn't get all the clean runs that he needed, and during the last run, Red Bull obviously got, the pit wall obviously got a warning note that, oh, you're not going to have enough fuel for scrutineering, you're probably going to want to stop right here. And yeah, that's what they told him to do. Maximilian, credit to him, he's got enough discipline to actually stop the car when the team has requested him to do so. Anyway, that's what happened there, and that kind of soured his weekend from there. And that pretty much soured the weekend from there. It was very hard to recover any meaningful positions at the Singapore Grand Prix. So Adrian Newey said he did not expect a Verstappen win. On the grid, the race was delayed on account of the rain. I'm not even gonna talk about that. I'm not even gonna talk about that. But while the delay was going on, of course, Newey got asked some questions. So he got asked a question whether or not Maximilian could fish out a win, and he said highly unlikely. It definitely is. Well, it obviously didn't happen. But otherwise, getting into the Grand Prix, there was some very clever driving by Maximilian at the start of the Grand Prix to cut the corner at lap 1. That was very clever driving. Why is it clever driving? Well, because he's gotten a poor start already. So you are not in anyone after getting a poor start, especially at Singapore. Alright, you studied the film, I suppose. But at Singapore, if you get a poor start in the middle of the pack, you definitely don't want to commit to taking the first corner, because you're not in anyone's periphery. You'd be coming from behind people's periphery at that point. And that's how accidents happen, because they're not going to give you enough room. So he cut the corner on account of his poor start. He cut the corner. He didn't make up any positions from it, if you're wondering. But he did avoid a potential incident by doing so. So that was very clever by him. And likewise, that Red Bull switches its tires on incredibly quickly relative to the rest of the field. Not the Ferrari. The Ferrari has probably got like the same tire switch on period as the Red Bull, but the Red Bull compared to this is why people got upset, right? But this is why it looked like he just drove around Magnussen. Yeah, Magnussen had a bit of front wing damage, but yeah, that's not enough to do that. And he just drove right around him. Right, he also drove right around Lance Stroll while he was waiting for his tire swap. That's just tire warm up right there. That's just the tire warm up difference between the two cars and the Red Bull. Right, that's all that is. Alright, are people jumping out of Maximilian's way? No, they just, like, everyone was racing hard at Singapore here. This is the thing. Like, people gotta put some respect on these drivers for this Grand Prix. Everyone was racing hard as nails. You know, everyone was racing hard as nails. Maximilian, he's power sliding on lap 6. He's trying to find an edge on everyone in front of him. He couldn't. It was difficult. That shit was difficult. So I've got to address Perez just real quick right here. Does Perez have the best right foot in Formula 1? Yeah, he probably does. He probably does have the best right foot in Formula 1. The only problem with having the best right foot in Formula 1 is that it doesn't pay all that often. It's not all that important an attribute to have. You would think that was different considering there's no traction control. Well, yeah, everyone would think that, but that's just not how it works in reality. Well, everyone's throttle control in the dry and not at a street circuit where there's painted lines everywhere. they've got more than enough throttle control to make the Formula One car sing. When you add the painted lines, it's a bit, let's say it's a bit different. It's quite different, right? It's quite different. At that point, you have to be, I suppose, one whole order of magnitude better on throttle application, right? Which Perez is. That just doesn't pay it. Every other instance you are racing a Formula One car, right? Well, in most instances you're racing a Formula One car, that just doesn't pay. Because throttle maps are so good that they've basically got dummy traction control. Let me not say that out loud. And most races are going to be run in the dry and at traditional circuits, and even if they're at street circuits, a lot of these new street circuits are coming out, like your Miamis, right? So there are no painted there are no street lines that are painted at Miami. So yeah, does Perez have the best right foot in F1? He probably does, right? I'll say yeah, he does. Does it pay all that often? No, not that often. It pays at a wet Singapore Grand Prix, it pays. At a wet Monaco Grand Prix, it pays. It's not really paying around the rest of the season. I suppose it was going to reap dividends at the Canadian Grand Prix, but he got sabotaged there anyway by Red Bull. But anyway, no one's talking about that too loud. So I'll just move on from that. So, what have I noted here? The gear shift issue for Verstappen. When did he have this gear shift issue? It was early on in the Grand Prix. I'm not sure if that gear shift issue was chronic on the car, it stayed on the car till the Grand Prix, or if it dissipated quick enough. I'm not sure about if they just reset the system and it went away. But yeah, he had a gear shift issue at some points in the Grand Prix. Did that force any errors later on? Who knows? Red Bull did tell Perez to keep up with the safety car. When the safety car was out, he dropped very far away from the safety car, but at that point, as far as I'm concerned, I'll get to this later, but as far as I'm concerned, he's permitted to do that at that point. The safety car's been driving too slow anyway, right? So you got to drop off and give yourself a good run on the safety car to heat up your brakes, keep your brakes up to temperature, and attempt to keep your tires up to temperature with the force that's applied during braking. So if the safety car is going to do this bullshit thing where it drives snail's pace, then this is what's going to happen. And I don't really think we can be blaming drivers for breaking the 10 car length rule. I don't really think you can do that. But anyway, Red Bull did tell Perez to keep up with the safety car. He was more than 10 car lengths back. I didn't think it was that important worth noting. Alright, I think there was a different safety car infringement, but that's not, yeah, that one's not worth noting now because that one didn't happen. So I've had to note this one because they didn't look at that one. After the restart, what happened? Verstappen, he locked his brakes at 34 minutes remaining of the Grand Prix. He was trying to overtake Norris, and he remarked that the car bottomed out. So I suppose Red Bull were running the car as low as they could get away with. Alright, they're not running it as high as they were at Baku, for instance. They were running it a bit low, and the car bottomed out. So it's very interesting to note that, because that means their ice skates did not stop the car from bottoming out when Maximilian pulled out of the slipstream, and the full force of that, what was the humidity there, like 90 odd humidity? I'm sure it's like 100% humidity, surely, because it had rained. But that 100% humidity air come crashing down on that Red Bull Aero when it's moving at some 300 kph. that forced it to bottom out. He locked up over there. That was interesting. Right, I'm pretty sure Newey's going over that piece of film. Anyway, after that lockup, Verstappen and Hamilton were back together, right? Hamilton, he had his lockup earlier, which damaged his wing, and he had to have that replaced. And after this lockup, him and Maximilian were right back together on the circuit. And then Maximilian had to pit for soft tires, and then he caught up again, and that was that. That was that as it was. Right, Perez reported a throttle delivery issue, both on braking and traction. Right now, I've noticed that Maximilian already had his gear shift issues from earlier. Right, Red Bull powertrains, they're just containing gremlins in their engine. They're doing a pretty good job of it. They haven't lost any engines like Ferrari, so so I suppose this is why. They've got a fix for every minor issue that they could encounter. Perez's safety car infringement was under investigation with 15 minutes remaining. They could have made a ruling in that time. They didn't. It didn't really matter at the end of the day because, well, because the team predicted what it was going to be, so so it didn't really matter. But anyway, really great race by Perez. Really great race. Like, this is probably, I don't see him getting a win at the Mexican Grand Prix now. Alright, or maybe Red Bull will still fetch a win for him there somehow. I'm not entirely sure, but yeah, Perez, he's probably gotten this one on merit. He's probably, because he had to, him and Leclerc, they were running qualifying. Yeah, they were running their own qualifying for 30 minutes, right? The final 30 minutes of that Grand Prix. Whew, these lads were pushing so hard. Well, they were pushing hard through the whole Grand Prix, but whew, those last 30 minutes, they were on it. They were on it. Right, make no mistake, they were on it. They were both making mistakes. Perez made mistakes, Leclerc made mistakes. Right, it really doesn't matter one way or the other. Right, they were on it. Everyone behind them was on it. Someone will argue science may or may not be on it. But anyway, that's just how it goes. Alright, not much to say about Ferrari. They were handed a challenging weekend. They didn't get the win, is what it is. I wasn't expecting them to get the win anyway. Even if they were good enough to get a win. But they didn't get the win, but all that aside, some fun things I want to talk about with Ferrari. Well, maybe it's fun to me, I suppose. So number one, Leclerc, the helmet cam. On lap 17, I mean, the footage, I'm just astounded that the drivers have the verve in the back of their heads to believe that the cars are gonna stick when they hit the brakes and turn in those conditions. Really, that really, because the road is sheened. The road's a sheen. It's shining. It's reflecting light off of its wet surface. So the whole circuit looks wet the whole time. There's a really good argument to be made for like just drivers keeping their nerve in these type of conditions. Right, now of course it's not the worst conditions F1 has seen. F1 has seen worse conditions where drivers have certainly lost their nerve. Which Grand Prix was it? 96 or 97? 96 Monaco Grand Prix, I'm gonna say 96. Anyway, Giancarlo Fisichella, he had a full career. Giancarlo Fisichella, he lost his nerve somewhere in the middle of that Grand Prix. Maybe in the last 45 minutes of it, he lost his nerve because the conditions were that challenging. He was lapping at a pace where he was looking likely for a podium, and something happened to him in the cockpit, and he was not lapping at that pace anymore. He was 5 seconds off it. He just lost his nerve on the day. Right, and it's funny, like, we just expect all the drivers just to get through the Grand Prix expecting the cars to stick every single lap no matter the conditions. And yeah, that helmet cam, that was a brilliant helmet cam, because the nerve of these guys to just have belief that these cars are gonna stick. Well, I suppose I should also make a note here about the performance envelope of these cars. These cars are performing, obviously they will be performing slower at high downforce circuits because they just don't have the same downforce as last season's cars or the previous formula of cars. But most notably, at a high downforce circuit that's also low speed, very low speed, like a Singapore street circuit, they're noticeably slow because of course the ground effects. you have to be moving at some rate of knots before that kicks in. So that's something worth noting. I suppose I might have to check the numbers on these cars at some point. Anyway, well, I'll leave that for the end of the season. But as is, they're definitely slower at slower circuits. There may or may not have been an argument for the cars finishing within the 2-hour race clock if the race was dry all the way with what, 2 safety cars or whatever. Anyway, what else happened with Ferrari? Sainz, he was not having a good time on those intermediate tires. He absolutely did not like those conditions at all. He said so himself in post-race, and he was desperate to get onto the slicks. He was even ready to put the slicks on at lap 18, which, well, going by George Russell's attempt, that would have been suicide. That would have been suicide, but he was desperate. Right? You say it's not long until slicks lap 18. It took essentially the whole other 18 laps for everyone to start picking up slicks. So it was quite a long way off. Maximilian Verstappen, he got asked by Red Bull on radio at the same time, and he said it's definitely far away from slicks. We're nowhere near slicks. Right? That's what he said. Sainz, I'm not sure what he was going to do if Ferrari actually listened to him on his suggestion here and pit him for slicks as early as Russell got pit for slicks. I don't know what he was gonna do if that happened. But anyway, all the legs were shaking in the Ferrari pit wall. I suppose probably was happening in all on the pit wall. I'm saying in the garage, in the Ferrari garage, all the legs were shaking. I suppose that was probably happening on all the pit walls and all the garages, except for those who lost both their cars. But yeah, the ambient conditions in Singapore were making it very difficult to pick a time to switch tires. It was just making it very difficult. Likewise, the lap length is so long that it makes the decision that much more vital, because you lose essentially a 2-minute lap around this place. Someone else might be doing a 1:49 if they've got the right tires, and you will be stuck doing a 2-minute odd lap, right? 1:55 or something. So that was making decision points just really hard to reach this Grand Prix. Alright, I suppose all the strategists earned their money, although some of them had it real easy for them with the safety car. Some of them, none of the ones that anyone would name. But anyway. Leclerc, he missed his pit box markers. I mean, we have to be really anal with finding faults for Ferrari this weekend. They ran as good a weekend as they could have run. Could Leclerc have been better with stopping in the pit box on the markers? He could have been. Not probably, he definitely could have been. It didn't happen. It doesn't really matter. With the pace that Perez pulled out at the end of the Grand Prix to make a 7-second gap, it really didn't matter at the end of the day. Alright, likewise, Leclerc locking up after losing tempo. He lost tempo by cluttering over the curb at turn 15. Alright, 19 minutes remaining of the race, I believe. He lost tempo at turn 15, and the car ran wide on him at turn 17. That might have even been turn 14 where he lost tempo, but he cluttered over the curb, and he just couldn't get the car. Well, he couldn't get himself back into rhythm after that. He did it twice. Once when there was 19 minutes remaining of the Grand Prix, and again when there was 11 minutes remaining of the Grand Prix. I'm not sure he cluttered the curb at turn 15, but he definitely ran wide heading into turn 17. Alright, he did that because he was pushing for every cent that is being paid to him on his contract at that point of the Grand Prix. But yeah, I can't really say an unremarkable weekend from Ferrari, but I mean, a serviceable weekend from Ferrari. Right, they should have won. Alright, they should have mustered up a win at this Grand Prix somehow, because Perez won the Grand Prix. So they should have mustered up a win somehow. They didn't. And that's just how the cookie crumble. At least they were not goofy this weekend, I suppose. So there's an optics improvement for Ferrari. Alright, I probably will have to address this. Yes, the Alphatauris were ushered out of Maximilian Verstappen's way. And yeah, that's what they're gonna do. That's how the thing do. That's how it be. It is what it is. That is the sister team of Red Bull. They're not gonna hold up. They're not gonna hold up the the incumbent champion. They're not gonna do that. They're not gonna race the incumbent champion. That's not gonna happen. They're the only ones who really jumped out of Maximilian Verstappen's way, the Alphatauris. Everyone else was racing him. I would have loved to see what Maximilian would have done if he came up against Fernando Alonso. I would have loved to see what happened there, but we didn't get to see that for other reasons. Alright, but yeah, the Alphatauris got ushered out of the way, and Tsunoda, this was his first appearance at Singapore. He didn't make the finish. Is what it is. Yeah, Singapore's a tough Grand Prix. If you're a rookie at Singapore, that's a tough Grand Prix. I'll talk about that later. I suppose Gasly has finished 10th. That matters to someone. Probably matters to Alpine, I guess. He should land at Alpine, Gasly. If he doesn't land at Alpine next season, then I don't know. Something's very screwy in F1, but things have been screwy in F1 for a long time. Okay, Alpine. Well, Alpine, they had a double DNF. It is what it is. Alonso had some interesting notes. On lap 20, he said he can't see a drive. The track looked like it was relatively dry from the cameras on lap 20, and he said from the cockpit that he could not see a dry line. Now, part of that is because of the lights, another part is just because of the humidity. Alright, so it's a double whammy. But he couldn't see a dry line, so even if a George Russell is pitting for slick tires, he can't actually see the dry line. Right, Alonso made that very clear with this radio message of his. So, you know, I suppose it's a one-off Grand Prix. Teams are gonna have to learn how to treat a wet Singapore Grand Prix as a complete outlier. You don't treat it like the rest, because you might be able to see the dry line that you got to skate on at, I don't know, at Spa when it's been raining there. You might be able to see the dry line to skate on there, but you're not going to see that dry line at Singapore. And someone of Alonso's experience, I mean, if he can't spot a dry line, don't tell me George is going to. I got all the faith in George, but don't tell me George is going to spot a dry line that Alonso cannot spot. But yeah, Alonso, he DNF'd. Right, and it's a double DNF for Alpine. If you spot the trail of oil being trailed by the car from Ocon's car that rolls back on lap 28, that looks like an expensive, that looks like a very expensive Brundle set it in there. That's a very expensive coffee table now. But yeah, Alonso, he's just, you know, you needed luck to get to the end of this Singapore Grand Prix. You really needed luck to do that, and Alonso, he just don't have any of that. And Alpine, who knows, Alpine might have cashed in whatever luck they have with how they handled this Piastri saga, because Otmar, he was completely in the wrong in this Piastri saga. Piastri had told him that he was leaving. They agreed that was in his contract that he can leave. And then Otmar announced to the team at factory that, oh, Piastri's signing. Piastri didn't want to upstage him because he's too nice. And then it grew legs of its own when it went out onto social media. I mean, even after Otmar announced to the factory that Piastri was signing, this was before he put it onto Twitter, right? But yeah, he announced to the factory he was signing Piastri. And I would assume Mark Webber pulled him aside and said, well, we discussed this, right? we've already had you okay that the lad is leaving. And Atma said, yeah, and then he did the Twitter thing. So, yeah, he might have cashed in all of Alpine's, well, not all of it, because they had some good luck since then, but a good chunk of Alpine's good luck he might have cashed in with, well, with that foolish set of actions there, that stupidness that that Atma did. He might have cashed in all of Alpine's luck there. And, well, it will show at a Grand Prix like Singapore when it's raining. Are they the only two engine retirements? I don't believe so at all. Yeah, double DNF for Alpine, and that's how the cookie crumble. Something worth noting, Ocon checks his mirrors to see if his DRS is working. Forget the light, he's got to look in the mirrors and see, oh, it's open. I like that, very analog. I think all the drivers do that. I don't think that would just be an Ocon trait. I'm pretty sure it would be the outlier driver. There would be one driver here or there. It would probably be Latifi, who's let me not anyway. Alright, Bottas versus Mercedes made a most uncanny and unlikely comeback. This talking point for the season made a most unlikely comeback, with George Russell starting from the pits and ending up stuck behind Valtteri Bottas. And George, he was stuck there for the Grand Prix. Right, he was really stuck there for the Grand Prix. Mercedes tried to let him gamble with the slicks to get ahead of Bottas, and that completely killed his race. So Bottas has had the last laugh here at Singapore. Somehow, some way. Somehow, some way, he's gotten the last laugh, because he's now kept the golden boy George Russell quiet for an entire Singapore Grand Prix, a Grand Prix that went 2 hours. Forget about the race distance; it went 2 hours. It's a movie. Anyway, Zhou, he got taken out by an outgoing Latifi. Yeah, I suppose Latifi's just gonna collect slander from now till the end of the season. I mean, it is what it is. I mean, Zhou, he's already confirmed for next season, so it's not a problem for him. He'll get another Singapore Grand Prix to attempt to finish. But they're the other two rookies that did not finish the Singapore rookies, I must say, right? They're not F1 rookies, they are Singapore rookies, specifically rookies at Singapore. And they are Zhou, Latifi, Tsunoda, and baby Schumacher. Alright, but yeah, Zhou got taken out. Anyone's guess what type of race he was going to have. You can't really say one way or the other, because there was too much race that happened after that. Alright, McLaren have had a stellar weekend. Norris, I don't know what there is to say about Norris at this point. He drove the wheels off this McLaren for this entire Singapore Grand Prix. The wheels off it. I got a name drop here, alright? Wonderful, formerly F Wonderful. He was making commentary about how Norris was gonna race his bestie Verstappen lightly. Norris was not racing lightly at Singapore. No one was racing lightly. A damp track at Singapore is not the time to give up positions just because of car differential, because the car differential stops existing for the most part. That was full-blooded racing. Right, that was full-blooded. That's why Maximilian, well, the car did bottom out, but he's gone for such an aggressive move because, well, Norris is racing the thing for real. Alright, and Norris, he was driving the wheels off that car like all Grand Prix. All Grand Prix. I would love to see what he does in a Red Bull or a Ferrari, quite frankly. I'd love to see what he does in an Audi, if Audi still join. Right, I'd love to see what he does in that. But yeah, he was the only one that got to pit under safety car. Well, it's not the only one, there were other drivers, but in that top 6 bracket that mattered, that top 6, 7, 8 bracket that mattered, yeah, he was the only one that got to pit under safety car. Let me not say for all the top 6, 7, 8, but yeah, he got to pit under safety car. And the Ferrari pair, the Red Bull pair, the Mercedes pair, they did not. And he banked greatly from that. Huge windfall for Lando Norris, right? Huge windfall, and for Danny Ricciardo. Danny Ricciardo, he was looking in trouble at the start of the Grand Prix. He knows himself. He's been incredibly fortunate to fish out this fifth place finish that he fished out. He knows himself. But still, to get to the end of this Grand Prix, yeah, you've probably earned your salary, right? Whatever your yearly salary is, you probably earned it off the back of this Grand Prix. So everyone can go back to the factory with a big Danny Ricciardo sized smile on their face, right? Everyone at McLaren, right? They can do that. And their strategists put all their brain power in getting Ricciardo back up the field. They put him on the softs at just the right time. Alright, Albon made the Grand Prix for Williams after his lungs, his respiratory system failed. Like, you know, he's already guaranteed for the seat next season. They could have just insisted that he raced. I suppose their stats on offer. Even just a Grand Prix competed in is a stat to take home. But yeah, I would say that was well, on one hand, I do just want to see Nick de Vries get another Grand Prix. I was a bit disappointed to see he didn't get another Grand Prix. I'd rather see Latifi axed from the seat at this point, although he can't be axed. There's too much money that's gone into the whole situation now at Williams, and he has to see out the season, see out his contract, because that Sofina Foods money is real. That's real money. That's real money. That's not a rich energy scam. That's real money. That's a company that's feeding millions of people. So they're printing their own section of money. But yeah, Albon, he made the Grand Prix. He had the accident that Tsunoda was trying to avoid a few laps earlier. I believe that was on lap 22 or 21 when Tsunoda nearly floated into the barriers. Albon had similar accident, different corner, but pretty much similar accident. He didn't get to recover the car, and that Williams had to be retired. And of course, Latifi crashed with the show. So it's a double DNF for Williams. Is it something for them to worry about? No, not really. I wasn't expecting a good result for them at Singapore anyway. Although, who knows, if both the cars stayed in the Grand Prix, anything might have happened. Alright, and with Tsunoda crashing, Baby Schumacher was the last one standing of the Singapore GP rookies, and he saw the finish. That'll be an advert to someone out there, right? Whether Baby Schumacher actually finds a seat or not, no, well, that's in God's hands now, I suppose. I don't think Gunther's gonna take him, even though he was having the drive of his life, as George Russell so described. And that was the drive of his life. You know, his whole career is. As far as he's concerned, his whole career is now on the line, pending how he performs in these final few Grand Prix. And Baby Schumacher, that is, I'm talking about. His whole career is on the line. So, yes, gorgeous Russell, Baby Schumacher is going to drive like it's the race of his life, because it is the race of his life, the race for his life, who knows. And Magnussen, yeah, he had another black and orange flag Grand Prix. It's just the way it, he's just not lucky, this guy. But he's not like incredibly unlucky, it's just like minor unluckiness. Oh, but it hurts. It hurts when it hits at the wrong place, and this was one of those. But anyway, Baby Schumacher has gotten the Singapore Rookie Survivors Trophy, if that's worth anything. It's probably worth something. It is probably worth something. I would be very surprised, even before the Singapore Grand Prix, I would be very surprised if Baby Schumacher does not make the grid next season. Right, I would just be very surprised. But who knows? He probably doesn't make it at this point. I would assume Gunther is simply applying pressure, attempting to make a diamond. Who knows? We'll see what happens. Anyway, I've got a silent assassins of the day section here. So there's 4 winners. 1, Sergio Perez. Perez, silent assassin of the day. They could they could have just not shown any of the racing that was happening at the front of the field, and there would be this assumption that it was a cakewalk for Perez. It wasn't. It absolutely wasn't. Leclerc kept him very incredibly honest, but he got on with it. And he gets one of the silent assassins of the day award. The next one is Norris. Silently got on with it. Picked up a huge result. Ricciardo, a double win for McLaren over here. And Stroll, Lance Stroll, he's another one who just silently got on with it and picked up a huge result at the end of it. You know, everyone is having their issues up ahead. Maximilian is locking up, Sir Lewis Hamilton is breaking a front wing and locking up, and somehow, some way, these guys just found their way into very high scoring positions. Nothing but credit, and nothing but credit to Perez for the win. Alright, Perez, Norris, Ricciardo and Stroll, nothing but credit. They're great drives. I don't even section out a portion of the video for praise like this. Great drives, right? Can't be understated. Everyone who finished did a great drive, but these guys specifically, they did something really special, really different. Probably best Grand Prix of, it's probably Perez's best Grand Prix of his life. He's never gonna have a Grand Prix like that again, ever. He might even go WEC, and there won't even be, if he wins Le Mans with someone, right, it won't even be as good a drive as what he's done at Singapore. That it won't even be, even if it's like the most ridiculous Le Mans, like is raiding every second hour or something. It won't even be as good as this drive. It won't. This was a crazy performance, crazy. Now I expect Perez to fall off for the rest of these Grand Prix, but let's see what happens. Mexico not that far away. And I want to make a note on the augmented reality. This is going to be my last note here. Well, this and one more note. I suppose I'm lying, about 2 more notes to make. The augmented reality is getting a bit gaudy. Y'all taking chances. Y'all taking production. Listen, F1 production, Sky, whoever's handling the international feed or whichever feed, if that's just all on Sky or what have you, I don't think it is. Yo, simmer down with the augmented reality. The spotlights, that spotlights graphic when the drivers went under the grandstand. What turn is that? Turn 18? 18, 19? That was just the worst thing I've ever seen in F1. Never do that again. Never ever. That was the worst thing. And the DHL product placement as well. Never do that. Never do that again. That was terrible. That was terrible. Don't even think of doing a Heineken one. That's also terrible. Can they even do a Heineken one in Singapore? Who knows? But that was all terrible. Don't do that augmented reality shit. Don't do it like that. Don't do that. Slow it down. Slow it right the fuck down. Y'all were doing so good with the augmented reality. It wasn't it wasn't too much. And now what I just saw at Singapore, stop that. Don't do that. Absolutely do not do that. I should not have to explain why. You get all your production team there, you know, get the director to look at that shit properly. If the director okayed that shit, fire him. Alright? That's how it goes. That's how it goes. That's how it should go as far as I'm concerned. Anyway. Anyway, that shit was appalling. Last point. Commentary was making, no, this is notes on commentary, right? Who was this? I suppose also Sir Lewis was called Sir in, what was that, FP2? Yeah, Sir Lewis Hamilton was called Sir. Was that by Ted Kravitz? I believe it was by Ted Kravitz. So there's notes on commentary right there. So Sir Lewis got a Sir out of them. So what is that, 2 for the season? Yeah, I think I got a count of 2, maybe 3. It might have been one earlier in the season. It probably was. It probably was. Saudi Arabia, I believe. Anyway. So that's 3. We got a count of 3 Sir Lewis Hamiltons for the season. Right, at least any Sir Lewis Hamiltons that are said when the cars are out on circuit, that's when people are actually fucking watching. Anyway. Anyway. What did I want to talk about here? Yes. Crofty. It doesn't really matter who said it, but Crofty, he was saying that the safety car is supposed to back up the field, right? Because Perez was signaling for the safety car to fucking get a move on, right? And there's now this, do I call it propaganda? I don't even know what the fuck to call it. There's now this bullshit that they're airing about the safety car having to back up the pack, you know, slow right the fuck down and back up the pack. Yeah, that was a thing for like a season, maybe 2 seasons, and then they decided that was too dangerous, so they stopped doing that. And quite frankly, the cars, if they're driving at VSC speeds, they will catch up with the safety car in no time, even if that safety car is trying to lap like it's in a race with one of these cars, right? Even if it's trying to do that, they will walk up to the back of the safety car at VSC speeds. So it's a it's a bit of a madness to me that I had to hear that being said on commentary, and it smacks of damage control for Abu Dhabi 2021 with Bernd Mailänder driving so fucking slow, right? It slaps off damage control. Likewise at Monza, Bernd, well, safety, it is Bernd Mailänder driving the safety car all the time, but the safety car was not backing the pack up at Monza. That safety car was on full tilt. Maximilian didn't have to shimmy alongside the safety car and give the hand signal. He didn't have to do none of that. Alright, so I'm just keeping abreast of this. I just gotta make a note here. Okay, I just gotta make a note here that commentary are airing bullshit propaganda, fake news about the safety car now having to back up the pack or whatever. That didn't happen in Monza. There was none of that. I didn't see any of that motion. And when that happened in Abu Dhabi, that was to force an illegal racing lap off the Grand Prix. Now it's happening here in Singapore for optics control. I know these motherfuckers click on these channels, bro. I know they got people all over the gaff. There's someone who's paid to fucking go to the bottom tier of the YouTube F1s and find out what the fuck people are saying when they are not under any financial duress to say the right shit. So I'm watching y'all in F1. I'm watching y'all. Someone's gonna say it was a fucking rule change after 2021, right? Well, that rule wasn't followed in Monza, so I don't want to hear none of that. And I'll go look at the other safety cars from the season. It probably wasn't followed then either. But anyway, that's the vid. Singapore GP observations. It was a bit of a perfect storm for Checo Perez. Everyone's learning how to gamble, and some men are impatient. Other men are incredibly patient, but some men are impatient. Understandably so, on all fronts. But I digress. That's the vid. Thanks for watching. Peace.
Hell breezy. Let me show you how to keep the dice rolling when you're doing that thing over there. Hey. Let's go! Cause I'm feeling like I'm running and I'm feeling like I gotta get away. Better know that I don't and I won't ever stop. Cause you know I gotta win every day. See, you really wanna pop me. Just know that you will never flop me. And I know that I gotta be a little cocky. You ain't never gonna stop me. Every time I come, a nigga gotta set it, then I gotta go, and then I gotta get it, then I gotta blow it, and I gotta shut it. Any little thing a nigga think that he be doing, cause it doesn't matter, cause I'm gonna dead it. Then I'm gonna murder everything and anything about it. Boom, about a bing. I gotta do a lot of things to make it clearer to a couple niggas that I always win, and then I gotta get it again and again and again. And I be doing it to death, and now I move a little foul. Nigga better call a ref, and everybody know my style. Niggas know that I'm the best when it comes to doing this, and I be banging on my chest, and I'm banging in the east, and I'm banging in the west, and I kinda give you more, and I will never give you less. You will hear it in the street, and you can read it in the press. Do you really wanna know what's next? Let's go. See the way we on it, and we all up in the